Welcome back. You are still watching Morning Live. It's time for our Saturday book feature. And this morning, we are discussing a memoir from debut author Xanti Bootcov titled, But They Look So Happy, A Mother's Journey to Loving Her Sons. In this offering, Xanti takes us on her personal journey of how she and her husband adopted two 6-year-old boys from a Mexican orphanage, and how knowing their sons had suffered untold abuse and neglect made it hard for them to connect emotionally. While she joins us in studio to tell us all about this book and the stories that she shares. Xanti, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So this book starts in Mexico, where you had recently moved with a boyfriend and you started volunteering at an orphanage. Just tell us about, you know, the motivation behind your move and what it is that you discovered when you arrived at this orphanage.
Well, we moved to Mexico for work, and I was learning Spanish, and there was Spanish all around me, and I craved the sound of English. And someone told me about this orphanage, and there were a lot of expats there. And to be honest, that was my motivation, to go meet the expats that spoke my home language and help a little bit.
And so you get to this orphanage, you start working, and you see a lot of children. You meet a lot of children who have been abandoned, who've suffered untold abuses, and you fall in love with two 6-year-old boys. Tell us what it is about those boys that had caught your attention.
I could not tell you what it was, because it was just a pull. The very first child I saw out of the lunchroom, he walked out and he pulled at my heart. And I thought, well, maybe it's the surroundings, or, you know, everybody here has a sad story. But then each time another child came out the lunchroom, I just saw a child, and I kept on going back to look at, you know, what's he doing?
Oh.
And the very last child just had that same connection. There isn't anything that I can say how they looked or how they acted. I just felt something deep inside me. So those two kids were the attraction. I couldn't put my finger on it. And they landed up being in the group that I was helping. So I was helping a group of, I think it was about 6 children with their homework. And they were within the age groups of 6 or 7. And that's what kept me going back. So initially I went there to speak with the expats, but those 2 little boys were the reason that I kept going back and back and back.
That's incredible. And what were your thoughts around adoption before you had gone to Mexico, worked at this orphanage, and, you know, ultimately fell in love?
Well, they were actually quite extreme, because when I was a child myself, I told some friends of mine that I was adopted. Don't know why. I look quite similar to my older sister, so I don't know why I told them that. I could never work out why. So there was that. There was a lot of adoption around me for some reason. I had some friends and cousins, and it was there. I knew what adoption was. But by the time I was in my 20s, I actually thought it wouldn't be a good idea. I couldn't see how it would work. I worried for the idea of the child feeling abandoned. But when I was looking at that, I was looking at that more from the child's point of view, when I thought it wouldn't work. So my ideas were very varied, and yet there was still this constant thing going on.
You detail in the book about how Miguel and Isaac battled with receiving love and care and affection, and that is common in children who have experienced abuse or abandonment. Tell us about how you guys ultimately worked through that connection.
Well, my boyfriend was adopted, so he had a bit of a perspective on that, but his adoption was very, very different to these children's. And so while that guided some of our discussions and our instincts, essentially we had to really just pull from deep within ourselves. It was quite difficult to work out what was the right thing to do. Sometimes in theory an idea was good, and then it turned out not to work out that well. So essentially what landed up happening is that I went on gut feel, And if something looked like it was working, then we'd stick with it. We did have therapists all along the way, and most of the time the therapists agreed that I had an instinct for these things. And so we would just go with that, and when things looked like they were working, we stuck with it. Sometimes they'd work for a little while, and then things would fall apart, and we'd
have to start all over again. I mean, this book, you talk a lot about the kids, obviously. It's a memoir to them. You change certain detail. What is the motive behind that? Is that solely just to protect them and their identity?
That was solely to... We discussed the book with the kids. They're not kids anymore, they're adults. But we discussed it, and they agreed that the motivation for the book would... It was to help other people in similar situations. So we wanted to make them a little bit more anonymous. I'm okay being in the limelight. Not really, but I'm putting myself out there. I didn't want to be putting them out there. They have their own story to tell, and one day they either will or won't. But I didn't want people contacting them, so I had to make it a little bit more obscure.
All right, Xanti, that's where we'll leave it. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for helping thousands of people out there who may have a different take on adoption and how it, can really change one's life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was South African world traveler Xanti Bootcov, and she's been speaking to us about her memoir titled But They Look So Happy, a mother's journey to loving her sons. While you can also join us for our Sunday book feature, just to talk about some of the books that you are currently reading or have read. Whether you're a lone reader or whether you belong to a book club, just send us some of your favorite picks. All you have to do is email us, send us a message on Facebook, or tweet us a picture of the book with a relevant caption by using our social media platforms. At Morning Live SABC is where you can find us on Twitter, hashtag Morning Live SABC, or you can also drop us an email, morninglive@sabc.co.za. It's time for us to find out what's happening in and around